Hey, now welcome to the show, where the wind's blowing strong and the truth can flow. This is the good oil. Catch a vibe today with Cam Slater leading us all the way.
Jordan Williams, welcome to episode 13 of the Good Oil podcast.
G'day, Cam.
You're a hard man to pin down.
We're here in Auckland. It's bloody convenient. You're a couple of 100 metres from my office.
How long have we known each other?
Well, I met Simon Lusk when I was at high school, and it wasn't too long after that. It must have been about 2005 when I moved to Wellington.
I remember the infamous meeting that we had at Puhoi that you were at. And
Mark Mitchell and Larry Mitchell's place.
Yeah, that's right, Larry Mitchell's place. And Louise Upston came and spoke there, and we were training young people to be candidates. Of course, this annoyed
I made some great friends
Yeah.
at that event.
This annoyed the National Party, something wicked, because we were running training sessions outside of their auspices. And they've never actually managed to do what we did on that weekend. But I remember
A lot of people elected that year.
That's right. And I remember when we had that meeting, we had a discussion. David Farrar was there. We had quite a few people that were there, and we were talking about the creation of the Taxpayers Union at that meeting. You wouldn't have been part of that discussion because that was done late at night one Saturday night.
Success has many fathers.
That's right. But I certainly remember that's when we started talking about it, and David, had the idea.
David talked about it for a long time.
Oh, yeah. But now you've formed the Taxpayers Union. When did you form that?
We launched end of October 2013. So I think we incorporated in about April 2013. And yeah, Dave and I talked about it for a long time. I actually first came across the idea when I met Matthew Elliott, who founded the UK Taxpayers Alliance when I was studying abroad. A few years after that, I met him in Berlin at an IDU conference, and thought, a Taxpayers Alliance, New Zealand could do with one of those. And as I say, David and I talked about it for some years, and then basically I took a few weeks off work, managed to fundraise the first, the startup capital basically. And then, that pulled the start gun. My first donor initially said no. And I said to him, well, would you be willing to contribute 10 or 15 if I get to 50 by the end of next week? And I thought he said yes, but the other person in the room tells me it took another half an hour. But that was effectively the start gun, because in the next person it was, I've got 15 from XY.
Oh, yeah.
But I have to get to 50 by next Friday. Will you help? But it did cost, the hardest thing was it did cost a friendship, and that I don't speak to Simon nearly as much as I used to, because we've gone different ways.
I keep telling the both of you need to get over it, and if I have to, I'll bang your heads together.
He takes a hammering because he doesn't speak to media much, but he is one of the smartest and actually personally most generous people in New Zealand politics. I think a little bit like Don Brash, actually, that the public reputation is unfair and people, ironically lacking integrity, seem to profit from a caricature that's actually not correct.
No, I mean, he is one of the most generous people that I've ever met in politics, and we've been the firmest of friends for quite a long time. We hunt together. The way he looks after his dogs and trains his dogs is something incredible. But I love his voicemail message. If he doesn't know the number, he won't answer it. And the voicemail message says, due to hunting or fishing commitments, I'm unable to take your call. Please leave your number and I'll call you back later.
And yet he's one of the hardest workers you'll come across.
Oh, yeah, he's working. And, I think the National Party unfairly rounded on him, but it didn't change his operation. He still trains candidates. He still trains candidates across the political spectrum. And he says to me often that he finds training Maori candidates the easiest because they've all learned to speak on the marae. And he says it makes it a whole lot easier to train them. So, we've both got that shared thing, but I'm sure the two of you will get over it. When you formed the Taxpayers Union, that was in the second term of the Key government. Did you get any pushback from the National Party?
Yes and no. I mean, the PMO were very much against it. My impression was that Joyce really didn't like it, and the sort of powers that be. There was some surprising support I think enough time has passed now, and I think it's covered in the book, that Super English, or he wrote the foreword to our book actually. And I remember him introducing me to the late Sir Ian Edgar. And Sir Ian Edgar basically stopped me in the middle of my pitch and said, hang on a minute. If your job is to have a go at my mate Bill English or the National Party, for which he was a long-time supporter, why does Bill want me to meet with you? And I'd said to him, well, the thing is, when centre-right government gets up, or Bill English gets up and does a budget, there's going to be 500 press releases going out at 2:00 attacking the government for how selfish it is, it's not spending enough money on albino snails or whatever. The role of the Taxpayers Union is to help balance that debate and point out the fiscal elephants in the room, point out that before you reach deeper into New Zealanders' pockets, you should be finding the waste or the low priority spending and readjusting that. And then the follow-up question Sir Eon had for me was, so how do you get along with the cabinet? And I came up with this answer, but I now actually use it as a yardstick, which is when there's a centre-right government, when the head of the Taxpayers Unions at the airport or in the Koru, you want about a third of the cabinet coming up and saying g'day and having a drink or having a meal with you. You want about a third that are indifferent, and you want a third avoiding you. Because if you're too heavy on one side, that suggests that you're not actually getting the job right. The Taxpayers Union is not a cheerleader for this government. In fact, I literally had some staff and volunteers outside the National Party conference in the weekend, being frankly the conscience of the National Party on this outrageous bank bailout changes, retrospective legislation to bail out the banks, the triple CFA amendment.
And it's all based on scaremongering because they've tried to settle that for 30 million. So that's the exposure.
Yeah, I know. The bank's having it both ways, and we've got a little bit more to say that over the coming weeks. But the point is that there are a number of National Party backbenchers that have communicated with me and my board that they know fully well we're right on this, and that is our role. On the other hand, a Green, Chris Hipkins-led Te Pāti Māori government is a bloody scary prospect for New Zealand.
Well, you'll be wanting that though, won't you, Jordan? Because your donations will go through the roof.
If I was here to make money, this wouldn't be the job that I would do. I mean, look, one of the challenges of running the Taxpayers Union is frankly the biggest regulatory tax threat, and I would argue the biggest threat to my kids' long-term prosperity or likelihood they'll stay in New Zealand, is the current path we're on towards best case scenario Malaysia, most likely is Fiji, or worst case is South Africa, where you have to pay a local in order to get any work done here, or in order to basically do anything, you've got to pay a tax or a
residency tax.
Yeah, in effect, it's rent seeking.
Yeah.
And that's I did not set up the Taxpayers Union to be a one law for all group. And I think you saw, though, with the Three Waters campaign, which, to be frank, we won that by not leading with the co-governance matter. You recall it was economic, high water costs, more bureaucracy, no local control, a localism message. And we actually said less democracy. We didn't even use the word co-governance through that campaign.
Well, it is less democracy.
Absolutely. But I genuinely think in the 12 years of the Taxpayers Union, our biggest contribution to the New Zealand body politic was Three Waters. Not because of Three Waters, but because it allowed New Zealand to have a discussion on co-governance and a debate that up until that campaign, New Zealanders didn't feel that they could have. And frankly, the media would not even, it was absolute third rail. And our own research, our focus group and polling research showed the moment you mention the word co-governance, you put off centre voters. And that actually shifted through that campaign. And then, of course, the final months of the Ardern government, you could use that word and not be able to be written off by Labour as you're a crank.
The problem that I see that you've got as a Taxpayers Union, and this isn't a criticism, it's that you've got a whole lot of supporters that think you should go easy on a national-led government when they've got just as much outrageous spending and stuff going on. And really, they've got a tissue paper, thinness of separation between Nationals' policies and Labor's policies, the only difference being the method of delivery, usually. And so it makes it harder for you, from your supporters' point of view, to say, hang on a second, this is still ridiculous spending.
That's why I was pretty encouraged the calls I got on Sunday from donors, from people calling saying, good on you for holding them to account on this bank retrospective legislation. It's outrageous, totally inconsistent with the values the government claim to believe in, ironically including the regulatory responsibility bill that you don't. I mean, it's because it's not just retrospective legislation. It cuts directly over a consumer class action. It's just outrageous. I think a better example of that, though, would actually be the government's fiscal performance. That the average New Zealander thinks the government is cutting, thinks the government is delivering on its promise. But we are in a situation where last week we learned there's more bureaucrats than there was when the Nats were elected. We are borrowing faster right now than we were when Labor left office. The structural deficit is larger. The cuts are simply slower growth in government. As a percentage of GDP, government is larger than when Labor left office. If this is what success looks like, I'd hate to see failure. On the other hand, we have the opposition parties still in this weird, fanciful world that the economic problem in New Zealand is that we're not taxed enough.
No, it's a ridiculous situation. But I made the comment at the last election that people really needed to divorce themselves from voting red or blue, because it looked to me that Nationals' pitch, and this was the pitch under John Key as well, was that we're just like Labor but less shit. And that's kind of panning out. That's what we're seeing. They're managing the decline, although it's slowed. It's still a decline. Whereas you look at some, people around the world that have made huge inroads into doing things, just overnight changes. The most prominent example would be Argentina, and what they've turned a basket case economy around in 1 year. And all the economists, all the people that criticize you guys for what you're talking about, people who criticize less spending, like Thomas Piketty and all of those Womble economists, they all said that Argentina will fail if he does this. And they've actually got growth happening. They've got real GDP growth happening in there. They've taken a chainsaw to the civil service.
We have a contrast, and that's and I want to put aside the brouhaha that Erica Stanford was in a few weeks ago over the Education Act amendments. But yesterday we actually saw, with the abolishment of NCEA, what fixing a problem and having an honest conversation with the public looks like. And you look today in the media, they're actually being rewarded. What is such a shame is on the fiscals, Nicola Willis seems to be nervous to actually do what everyone agrees is the right thing to do, which is get on top of, frankly, a generation of overspending. The government is acting like we're in the John Key era where all they need to do is wait for the economy to recover. Look, the klaxons are going off. New Zealand's 10-year gilt rate or 10-year bond rate is the highest in the OECD.
It's because they're
It's
trying
worse
to.
than the UK. Are you following the UK media of how bad it is there?
Oh yeah.
The klaxons are going off, and the National Party are focused on the butter, the cost of butter.
And
But
but
that's
she's
all
screwed,
fine for
he screwed that debate up though.
well, that's fine. That talks to Tim the taxpayer, Sally the single mum, and Danny Virk. But unless you're addressing the underlying issues, my big fear is that in 12 months' time, Christopher Luxon is going to have to go to the electorate. And the pitch is intended to be, we've got the adults back in charge of the economy. Do you feel better off than 3 years ago? We're in the field at the moment with this month's poll. I'm very concerned at the resounding answer in a year's time, and I think we're starting to see that on the right Ron track measure, is a resounding no.
But anyone who's a political tragic like yourself or like me, who's following the polls, we don't look at just one poll. We look at the trend. And the trend is National is stagnant. And the trend is people really don't like Christopher Luxon that much. And it's as obvious as the nose on your face that there's an issue there with the leadership. But the problem the National Party has got, the problem with the National Party has got, is if they do replace Luxon, and I'm not saying they're going to, because I don't believe they've got the guts to do it, is who replaces him? Is it Nicola Willis? God forbid.
I think that's an interesting debate to have. Not one that I'm quite willing to have on tape, because I don't think that would be particularly good for the Taxpayers Union. I've already been hard enough on Nicola Willis, but I push back on what you're saying, Cam, because I don't think leaders need to be liked. Jim Bolger was never liked.
Right thing.
Helen Clark was never liked.
No.
It is for the, appreciate, yep, we're political nerds. For the normies, it is how worried I am about the finances. And you only need to talk to friends and family to discover that, $400-500 power bills are now common if you have a family. The costs of living is not an academic assignment that the Ponsonby journalists talk about as headlines in the Stuff newspapers or on Stuff online. It is really, really tough out there. And we're seeing that with simply the numbers headed across the ditch. And as we all know, Australia is not that flash either at the moment.
No, it's not that flash. But again, it comes back to, we have this problem in New Zealand where we lurch from supporting the red team and supporting the blue team. And the minor parties don't really get much of a look. And this is the first government where the minor parties are a little bit larger than almost nothing. And they're making a mark because they've got nothing to lose. So they're putting a stake in the ground. Winston is banging on about bad Maoris and woke people and all sorts of nonsense stuff. It's great headline making stuff. Keeps it in the forefront of people's minds. David Seymour's doing the same thing. He's saying we need to have a discussion about this. We need to be growing up about this. The media are howling him down, but now he's talking directly past the media.
Doesn't matter. Look at the power of organisations like the Taxpayers Union, and like the parties are now really onto this, is your own lists and your own support base and your own ability this year to talk directly to the public. With Three Waters, or even actually this most recent campaign, where I think it's fair to say we've now won the politics on rates capping, we haven't had any TV, none at all. One News have even done
I would have thought rates capping. Everyone moans about rates, don't they? Everybody. Local body
not if you're Campbell Barry or the head of LGNZ.
No, but I'm talking about every ordinary.
They moan that they're not high enough.
Yeah, ordinary New Zealanders who have to pay their rates bill, moan about the rates bill, and moan about the council. And every local body politician promises to reduce rates, and none of them ever do.
Cam, it's not just a moan.
No, it's not a moan. It is. It's very annoyed.
It's 35%. Isn't some councils increased rates by 35% in the last 3 years? That's the average. The average council has increased their rates by more than a third over the last 3 years.
But see, they lie about it when they do it. They say, "Oh, we've got our rates.
We've got to spend it on infrastructure."
But they say we've got our rates increase. It's only going to be 4.5%.
Yeah, that targeted rates.
But then they have targeted rates. But they say 4.5% each year for 3 years. Well, that's not a 4.5% increase, right?
Yeah, cumulative. And it's also cumulative, of course. We had a lot of people say, hang on, when you add up those three, it doesn't equal that. It's because it's cumulative.
Yeah, it's more.
So there is, I was very pleased to see over the weekend the former head of the Infrastructure Commission actually start to nail, the real issue, the real discussion New Zealand needs to have, that we're in the top 10% in OECD in terms of the money we're putting into infrastructure, but what we're getting out the other end is very poor. What really concerns me about the local government leaders is that they're simply failing to ask the right questions, which is, it is not an amount of money issue. It is a value for money proposition. And it really scares me that, as far as I can tell, no one's really putting the work in.
That's ever been the way in New Zealand politics. You get, I mean, Bill English, I think he was a hopeless leader, but he was a very good finance minister. He was focused on outcomes. If we're going to put $1 billion into something, what are the definable outcomes that we can use to measure that? And nobody in council does that, and I don't think anybody's doing that now in central government.
Well, that's actually what the Regulatory Responsibility Bill was about. But when we presented on that to the Select Committee, I think it was one of the Labour Party MPs asked, why is this so controversial if it's as simple as you say? Well, it's because it's off the back of treaty principles, that they're whipping up a fury into it, where it's at its first and foremost, it's simply required. Parliament can still do what it liked. It simply required Parliament to say, here's what we want to achieve, and here's how we're going to do it, and here are the winners and losers.
See, I don't think very many people understand how these things work. Like last week, there was a big furore because Judith Collins, as Attorney General, doing her job, assessing a bill according to what she's required by law to do a report. David Parker did it all the time. So David Parker did plenty of Bora reports that said this is contrary to the Bill of Rights. Not a peep, not a mutter, not a murmur from the media about all of the excesses in the Ardern-Hipkins regime that were destroying human rights. But then Judith Collins comes in and says, well, this might affect, this voting change might affect the Bill of Rights and might disenfranchise some people. That's a little bit of a warning. And it was, government's own minister, says this is bad.
She's doing her job.
She's doing her job. Law. Yeah.
And actually, Bora, the Bill of Rights Act is similar in terms of requiring Parliament to turn its mind to the issue. That's an effect,
which they then ignore.
Which it can. Yep.
Yeah, they do.
It doesn't affect the parliamentary supremacy,
yeah,
despite the fact that the mischief makers on the left are saying that this overrides the treaty and things like that. It's nonsense on stilts.
Well, the Bill of Rights Act, I think we missed an opportunity when that was passed. And correct me if I'm wrong, I think it was Geoffrey Palmer who passed that. He did not make that the primary piece of legislation that everything else should fall, should come.
Well, it's not supreme law.
No, it's not supreme law. It can be ignored. And so that's where we saw these appalling breaches of human rights during the COVID years.
Well, it's also it also speaks to the lack of strength in our institutions. That look at the way the courts, you think that if you're a lawyer and you had, say, the vaccine one is not a debate that I particularly wanted to enter. I've always had a view that reasonable minds can differ, and for me, it was the vaccine mandates rather than the vaccine per se that was outrageous. But there is one that, no matter your views on it, you'd think that the law as a profession would jump on it, as it is the for sure, or even the lockdowns to be able to move in our leave Auckland or move in our own country. These are the most significant Bill of Rights, human rights cases in New Zealand, and yet the courts in every instance
and the Human Rights Commission
slow walk them. That actually, when the institutions were tested, they totally failed. I point to at the moment, and look, if you've got a high net worth individual that might be willing to underwrite it, I think that there is a very much a public interest private prosecution against Te Pāti Māori right now for their blatant refusal to comply with electoral law, where they have repeatedly failed, not just to put them in late, they still haven't put, my understanding is, the electoral returns in from last year, basic electoral law disclosures, for which our institutions have said, we're going to give you a warning, even though it's still not complied with. It is almost as if our institutions are so weak, they do not want to take Te Pāti Māori on because of who Te Pāti Māori are. And I think that the remedy for that is a private prosecution, and that would be in the public interest.
Yeah, I think we need to look at things like that, because I've been talking for years about the toothlessness of the Electoral Commission. Every year there's massive worries.
Except when it comes to New Zealand First or the centre-right parties.
Yeah, but even so, the Electoral Commission says, well, we're going to refer this to the police for prosecution because they have to, because they can't prosecute themselves. They don't have the powers. They could, if they had a way to jiggery the budget around, and take a private prosecutor, but they don't. They refer it to the police, and then the police spend 6 months and then come out and say, oh, it's not in the public interest to pursue. And so
Worse than that.
egregious breaches of the law
Yeah.
by political parties.
Oh, well, that goes all the way back to 2005 when Labor overspent on the
Pledge card. Yeah.
And it was worse than that. The police announced they weren't going to prosecute on the day before the limitation, before it was statutory barred from anyone taking a prosecution.
Yeah.
As I've become older, I've become a lot more cynical on the quality of our institutions. And also, what happened to me at the Supreme Court and the sailing holiday with the Supreme Court judge and the QC on the other side.
That's the same.
It's very difficult to and I'm not a libertarian burned down and I'm a classical liberal. I believe, and I'm not about burning down institutions. I'm about strengthening them.
Some should be
But it is
down, though.
it is getting harder to defend some of these some of the institutional practice in New Zealand.
It's appalling the way, if you look at the way the SFO has tried to turn the law inside out and upside down in order to try and get some prosecutions against political parties. They failed in every respect in all of those cases because they tried to apply the Crimes Act to Electoral Act offences. It's appalling that they even tried it, and then they just shrugged them in, oh, okay, and walked away after they lost, at great expense to the people they prosecuted.
So you've had a bit of a road. Let me turn this interview around. You've had a bit of a road to Damascus, because I recall when I first got to know you, and actually when I think about it, I think it was more through David than Simon necessarily. You were pretty anti Winston Peters. I remember I
used to call him Winston Raymond Peters, and then his age, and then
point out his toupee is sometimes crooked. And if you look at anyone, in fact, I'm looking at you closely now, Cam, I think that's slightly crooked. If you look hard enough, almost anyone.
Well, I did that to Winston, and he was in the studio at TV3, and it was after, I can't remember, it was at some event, then they were lining everybody up, and I was sitting in the studio ready to go on next after him. And they had an ad break, and I made eye contact with Winston. I went, and then he called and he says, Cam, what are you saying? I said, Winston, your wig's on crooked. And then they went 3, 2, 1, live. And but that, you know what I admire about Winston Peters is I've sledged the hell out of him. I've attacked him. I've done all of those. But when he saw that I was in need of help, he reached out. He picked up the phone and said, it doesn't matter what we play politics. It's a game. We play it robustly. You sledge me, I sledge you, but you look like you need some help. And he reached out to do that. At the same time, the National Party was abandoning anything to do with me. They don't even talk to me. You know, I even had to Brisbane to try and chuck me out of it hard.
I'm just looking forward to it when Winston ensures you get a knighthood.
Well, so am I. I'm looking forward to that too. Hopefully he can do it, in a similar way that Biden does some pardons,
What do you mean with a robo machine? With a robo signer? Are you suggesting that? Let's not go there.
I think we'd have to get Winston exceedingly drunk at the Green Parrot for that.
That would never happen.
I don't think it's possible.
No.
During the COVID years, the Taxpayers Union copped a bit of a flogging over taking the wage subsidy. Perfectly legally taking the wage subsidy. But the left wing attacked you. I mean, I'm surprised you didn't see that coming.
Oh, no, we did.
You did.
We did.
Let's talk about that for a bit, because I don't think you've been given a fair go in explaining that.
I don't mind at all. Look, it was unimaginable when, it was a pretty odd time. By late February, because we were onto it pretty early, most New Zealanders had their sleepless night at some point in March. For me, it was 1 February. And it was because my largest donor at the time cancelled a meeting on me on 1 Feb. And I texted him and said, I was hoping to have a chat to you about this Wuhan virus. He said, actually, that's why I'm not seeing you. I've sent my domestic staff home and hunkered down. And he's a Silicon Valley type based in Queenstown. And that really made me freak out. And I was right at that point. I had a 3-month-old babe, my first child. And so right.
Well, I
your
remember
risk
talking to you at that
preferences- oh,
time.
I've gone completely mental.
Yeah.
Right when your risk preferences are changing, that was when COVID was coming along. So we were onto it pretty early, and we basically said in an unusual report, and we described it as such with the Taxpayers Union, as, we're fiscal conservatives for a rainy day. The rainy day is on the horizon. I don't think we quite said spend, baby, spend, but we were pretty far ahead of the pack on that. But at that point, it was unimaginable we would ever call on anything. And then after about basically 6 weeks with almost no income, and the wage subsidy is there, I thought it would be a very difficult meeting of the board, but David and I knew, because David, my co-founder, was still on the board then, and we knew that we were going to have to, excuse the French, but eat shit, and take a flogging. But I wasn't willing to look my staff in the eye, including staff who do not necessarily share the Taxpayers Union's politics, and say, we're going to choose not to pay you on the basis of we want to avoid bad PR. And when push came to shove, I felt my ethical duty as an employer trumped political purity or preference. Now, as it transpired, we bounced back and we paid back the money. And of course, we went after what we thought. I mean, we could demonstrably show that our income had collapsed. Yep. But there was particularly, I remember, some of the public sector unions that took the wage subsidy, for which we could not figure out how their income had reduced enough to qualify. And we said, look, pay it back, in the same way as we said to, I remember, who's the that left wing clown?
There's a lot of them. The whole purpose of
the son of the former mayor of Auckland, the Jim Les Mills.
Oh yeah, Les Mills.
Yeah, the son. That he's out there criticizing the government and how much and all this sort of thing. And well, pay your wage subsidy back, pal. You're a rich lister. It's all very, you complain about that, how much the government's borrowing or whatever it was, but you're quite happy to for it to borrow further. Look, it was always going to be hard, and I think it's a fair criticism. I don't resent, it's like when I was on Guy and Espin or on RNZ last year, they threw it at me again. It's okay. I knew that would happen by taking it. I still stand by that it was the right decision. And to be frank, look,
the rules were ridiculous. I mean, it was poorly thought out.
On that basis, I shouldn't, because I'm a fiscal conservative, I think interest-free student loans are an outrageous wealth transfer to the upper middle class from working class. Am I going to send a donation to the government for interest that I think I should be paying on my student loan? Bugger off. Yeah, I mean, that's totally in the same way as I don't resent. I know I have donors who take the superannuation and they donate it all to charity, because what they're saying is that I'm a better steward of this money than those politicians in Wellington. I don't resent that, and nor should you.
But let's just touch on those public sector unions. Their entire staff was sent home on full pay to work from home, and many of them haven't returned to the office. They're still working from home in Wellington in particular.
You've actually nailed that. The Wellington is dying. Wellington's dying. It's not because there's job losses. It's because they're not going into the office.
Well, that was the accusations when the protests happened in Wellington. They said, "Oh, the cafes are struggling." Well, the cafes in Wellington were struggling before the protest happened because everyone was working from home. Sure, the cafes in Kandala or Karori or they were doing all right, but the CBD ones, their business had collapsed, and it wasn't because there was a protest there. It was because the civil servants were still working from home. And as I said, many still are. In fact, even at Auckland Council, there's still a lot of people that are working from home. They've even got a remote worker who lives in Spain in the Auckland Council. Can you believe that?
I can fully believe it. Yeah,
they've got another guy that lives in Brisbane. And
it's very important that, I mean, as a ratepayer, as a Auckland ratepayer, I mean, I want to have someone looking after my interests in Spain and what in where, in Madrid or what?
Oh no, somewhere in.
So it could be Valencia.
Yeah, it could
be Valencia. Well, that would be sensible, wouldn't it? It would be.
I know councillors that have raised this at the council and been told to pull the.
Oh, they shouldn't, because that's an operational matter.
Yeah, that's right.
No, they shouldn't be. They shouldn't be doing that. They shouldn't be doing that.
Isn't that
Totally, and as the a local government official would say, it's inappropriate. Inappropriate is always the word used when you don't really have a reason, but you
well,
don't do that sort of
but how did you
inappropriate.
how did you like the government official who said after they had the body of one of the staff members lie in state in a government building? It was originally going to be the National Library. They were going to close the National Library down so they could put this coffin in there of some senior manager of the civil service, so they could staff could say goodbye to him. They did it anyway. They just used a different building, and then when the minister said, "Well, that's not really on," they went, "Oh, well, it won't happen again."
Yeah, I didn't really follow this. It seemed David Farrett blogged on this, yeah, and it wasn't clear who it was. I'm pretty sure it was the deputy chief executive or deputy secretary of internal affairs, and he was very. I think he understand he was only 50. He was young, and it was a pretty sad and quick passing, from what I understand from a friend who's ex-DIA. Look at the TU is not going to jump up. It seems a bit tin-eared. I don't think it's an outrageous waste of money. Or
I wasn't criticizing him for an outrageous waste of money. I was criticizing him for how dare they? Who else is going to get? Oh, I want to lie in state in the beehive.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Who does that? Was it a request?
Well, I suspect Winston will, but that's probably all right.
Well, maybe they should put
But one day he's got to. One day, drive away. Yeah.
Maybe have like a Stalin-esque mausoleum on the forecourt of Parliament on a plinth,
Yeah, it's be art. Be able to bow your head.
I think that'd be hilarious.
I mean, this is a terrible segue, but actually, I think one of the material risks of Christopher Luxon in this government is actually Winston. I really like Shane, but I'm not sure he could keep New Zealand First support where it is.
So what if he had Stuart Nash join him?
Well, I couldn't. Stu Nash is joined the board of the Taxpayers Union, and I hope that he serves a very long time on the Taxpayers Union board, because I've only lost one board member to become a New Zealand First cabinet minister, and I'm not particularly keen to have another. But Stu there's been a bit of commentary on that. Stu actually was helpful for the Taxpayers Union right back as early as 2014 when he wrote a foreword for us on corporate welfare.
Yeah, he's a right-thinking. I wouldn't even call him a lefty, really. I don't even know why he ended up. He's in the Labour Party because of his grandfather.
Pretty soft on industrial policy. Some of that. Ironically, some of that economic development stuff. But look, we're not an ideological straitjacket. I remember saying at one of our donor, I think it was our office Christmas party in Wellington one year, that it was the first time I'd properly been overseas in a time zone where I wasn't awake for the morning calls, for our daily stand-up calls. We planned the comms for the day. And I'd wake up and I'd read the Taxpayers Union missives that day or press releases, and I only agree with 75%.
Yeah.
But that's okay. As long as they are in the mission and they're not darting off outside our wheelhouse and they're pushing in, for the interests of Tim the taxpayer, that's okay. I mean, one of and I could argue it's a legitimate criticism, or I actually think it's just part of the parcel, is the Taxpayers Union are always Scrooge McDuck. Well, yeah, that's our effing job.
So
it isn't to be the contrarian.
Hang on, Scrooge McDuck is sitting on mountains.
It's to be Frithful or
prudent.
There's lots of, and some of the caricatures that we're often accused of saying that actually we actually don't. But the fact that people think we say them is kind of illustrative of what we're going for, which is that that we want officials and ministers to be thinking, what if the Taxpayers Union found out about this? I remember,
That's your measuring stick, isn't it?
yeah, I remember being in one of your good friends, Hekia Parata's house years ago. It was like on New Year's Eve or something, where it was strange. I was up East Coast with a friend, and she said, "Oh, the taxpayers. Oh, yeah, you guys were. Oh, it was just great. I could say to officials, if we do this, what if the Taxpayers Union find out? What the hell are you doing?" And I could throw it back at them with that. And I thought it's really hard to
You
measure
believe me.
success.
Well, what would happen if whale oil got hold of this, right?
Yeah, yeah, it is. But that's actually okay. That is part of what.
That's what a vibrant democracy is all about.
Absolutely. And you think of the way that probably Nicola Willis is, bless her, being nervous about, if I do this, the stuff or the spin-off might give me a hard time. Well, we need the other side thinking about that, because our light, our shining light on the hill is good policy. My boss is now Ruth Richardson. She is just unbelievable. Like, just in terms of holding up what is good policy and bringing us back to the fundamentals. I could not ask for a better chair.
Well, policy is more important, I'd say, than spending. If you've got a good policy and spending follows from that good policy, the policy will also have measurable outcomes built into the policy.
Yeah, I'm mostly focused on fiscal policy. But
Yeah, that's right. But I mean,
the Democratic. I mean,
a good example of that would be Jacinda Ardern announcing they're going to spend $1.9 billion on mental health. Remember
without a plan,
right?
Yeah.
What happened to it? It got spent. It's gone.
But we don't
But
know.
what did we get for it?
Yeah.
And who goes back and says, well, you said that this was going to do this, 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 and this. Here are the statistics for mental health, despite spending $1.9 billion. There wasn't good value for money.
Yeah, I think that is partially, though. I mean, Ardern clearly operated on what my generation were brought up in politics in sort of a comms-led era. I talk about now with that we're now in a sort of content-led era. But you look at the way that government worked, it was basically on a 2-week forward, 2-week back horizon, which is, a very much a comms way of thinking. But I think that the primary reason why Ardern failed, because I think Ardern was the best political communicator, with possibly even better than Longy. I was going to say since Longy. But look at the intellectual furniture in
It's in their house.
Well, yeah, I was going to say compared to the 80s.
You'll look at Ellen Clark, right? She had intellectual head.
She had a few passengers, but yes,
But she had to weave her way through the factions of the Labour Party, keep them under control, and keep the excesses of the more lunatic fringe under control and govern. Now, that takes mental acuity that she has. I think she's somewhat lost it now. I think she's suffering from relevance, disassociation. Nobody listens to her anymore, so she has to pipe up all the time and touch the entire country on any topic she chooses.
She co-wrote a piece actually with, I think, Ban Ki-moon in The Economist a few weeks ago that no one in New Zealand media picked up on, basically defending calling for what appeared to be very moderate reform of the UN. But there is...
But Ardern didn't have any of that.
No, she didn't. And I think that is a riddle that I haven't figured out how I can help fix that. If a donor asks me, what's the bang for buck, what is the biggest impact you can have on improving New Zealand's public policy after a generous donation to the Taxpayers Union or Free Speech Union or one of the groups I'm involved with, it is actually figuring out how do you broadly increase the caliber of people putting their hand up for public service in New Zealand. And
that's a real problem.
Yep. And it is.
It's not salary either.
I don't think it's yes, I agree. And I don't think it's exclusively a Labour or left issue. I'm certainly not going to single anyone out, but I do think that the caliber that Luxon has available to him is lower even than Key. And there are obvious exceptions. There are some really, including on the backbenches, some really incredible minds there.
So if you look at
the average, I do think is Who's the guy that ran Matthew Elliott hired to run the Brexit campaign, who ended up in Boris Johnson's,
I don't know.
the bald guy. He was the one who did the big drive during the COVID lockdown in the UK.
Can't remember.
He started going back on the speaker circuit, talking about the inner workings of how basically Westminster government stuff, because the officials are in charge and they determine the conclusions of the meetings before they have them, etc. But is one of his observations on his speaking circuit at the moment is that government, compared to a couple of generations ago, or even a generation ago, simply is not attracting the best and brightest. And that, I think, is the case here too. And that it is something we should all be concerned
And I
about.
think it's particularly systemic in the larger parties, like the National Party and the Labour Party.
He will talk about the bureaucracy as well, but
Sure.
yes, I mean, in politics, make it, and partly it's the polarization, which
Yes.
I'm very conscious.
I'm
sort of-
totally conscious of I put that a lot of the problems we've got in New Zealand society today stems from the Clark years, and then we've basically lurched left and right. And every time we change government, there's a polarization that occurs.
Yeah,
And the
I
Labour
put it
Party,
to COVID rather than.
well, COVID was
before my time,
particularly
but-
bad, but you were too young with Clark. But the demonization of political opponents, when they're simply explaining a different point of view, like I said to you earlier, the Labour Party and the National Party have largely got the same policy mix. All they're arguing over is how they're going to deliver that, or how much they want to spend on that.
Yeah, it's the projecting of not just you're wrong, but you're evil. And it's also, I remember being particularly shocked when we were allowed to travel to Australia, and I went to a conservative conference, and I think it was in Sydney or Brisbane, and just being astonished with the degree of nastiness projected towards the left in Australia. It was ironically the only there were protesters outside screaming no to hate. Nigel Farage was there, and he was attacked by the protesters. That was the only violence. But even inside, it wasn't they're wrong, it's that they're evil. And I may have used it earlier when I talked about the vaccines, but I use the term quite a lot, that reasonable minds can differ
Absolutely.
on this matter.
Yeah.
And it is something that we, as commentators, we should always remind ourselves and ensure in any audience that there is, for lack of a better term, social permission to disagree. Because ironically, polarization makes it easier for us to get clicks. It makes it easier for small dollar fundraising, for example. But what gets me up in the morning is convincing Tim the taxpayer, Sally the single mum, and Danny Virk, the median voter, of this radical idea that they spend their money better than Town Hall or Wellington. Polarization hollows out that middle, and it actually makes it much harder. And it is something that, I mean, and I'm not suggesting we always get it right.
No, and
But it's something I'm proud of with the TU is we really strive to be funny, not nasty. That's
why you've got the big rat or whatever you
the
porky the pig
or the debt monster. Or my favorite in the last 12 months would be my poor staff. We have a quarterly planning session. I get all the staff in the same room, and it was the day that Hastings District Council voted to put teenagers or kids on their youth council as voting members of their council committees. And at about 2:00, the CEO had this brain fart of an idea to get a bouncy castle and a bubble machine and the like, and put together a bouncy council meeting on the lawn outside the council at 10:00 the next day. And my poor staff falling over themselves trying to organise. The photographer actually was the hardest, because they all have done work for the council. A bouncy castle and a sort of basically a circus to do it with almost no notice. But I think that's right on the button. It really pissed off Sandra Hazelhurst just absolutely embarrassing because I've got a lot of family in Hawke's Bay, but really can't stand me. And it was because, as a mayor said to me at the LGNZ conference a few weeks ago, because we absolutely humiliated that council. Now, that's what I mean. It was fun, not nasty, but not apologetic.
No.
And I think that I also really loved it because, unfortunately, the democratic stuff is moving more, and we are Democrats at the Taxpayers Union, and we will fight for it. But it's so hard to make the race stuff appealing, and it's a real challenge. Whereas here it was kids, but it was the same principle. It's that the decision makers should be democratically elected, not appointed to screw the scrum. And it was even worse here because Sandra, I think we should use their casting vote. It was just outrageous screwing of the scrum to get these kids onto council, or onto the council committees rather. And without a doubt, that sent a message to every other council in New Zealand. If you do this, you could well have the Herald, 150 Taxpayers Union supporters, a bouncy castle, some clowns and a bubble machine, outside pointing out the madness of it.
I call it the Nelson Muntz attitude, right? Nelson Muntz is a Simpsons character, and he's the one who points at ridiculous things that people are doing and goes, ha ha, ha ha, ha ha, right? We need to be able to do that. And this comes back to that polarization. And I see this mostly from the left, but I'm starting to see it a little bit on the conservative side, where the left wants to shut down anybody who disagrees with them. Right?
Well, yeah, we saw that with Three Waters.
We saw that with Birdie Pollock, right? That was an attempt by Nicky Hager and his enablers in the Labour Party and the Green Party to silence effective voices on the conservative side. Now, it failed, right? It had an impact, though. It meant National had an increased majority in the election campaign. But that was a direct attack designed to silence people, designed to cut off me talking to media, designed to cut off me talking to politicians, talking to other people, whatever. And I had the same attitude that you had. I didn't do things out of maliciousness. I did things because they were fun. And I would mock people. I would do Photoshops. I would, highlight silly things that they'd say and all of those sorts of things.
You and I have both had some heat because of some political memes over the years. Look, I'm sorry, political cartoons, the use of humor to make a point, is, I will defend. I'm a free speech guy. I consider that a really important part of
some of the things that have been said about me and said about you, particularly after Dirty Politics, were highly defamatory. But I just shrugged and carried on. It's the left and associated people on the left that always want to silence effective voices.
Yeah, I think one of the things, one of my mantras with the team is, don't twist the knife. I do think that
slam it in there though with a grin. But
one of the things is that particularly when a minister loses their job, that the staff have all lost their job too. And
that's what
always
people
remind you.
about that.
Yeah, I always remind my team, just look, it's a little bit like as you said the other day, this guy that works for Auckland Council, but somehow has racked up, I think it's $500,000 or a couple of $100,000 in IRD debt, with the business on the side, who got the sack or did the right thing and resigned as the mayor's chief of staff. I actually said to the staff, because we saw that news and it was suggested we should react to this. I said, look, it's done. He's gone.
What's it got to do with council though?
Well, if it depends, I'm going to get some advice on it, but if it depends on the type of IRD debt, and the company had no assets, it does look to be something pretty dodgy there, which I say that and things like that. Well, if it's a BOIE, yes, that's pretty bad.
Yeah.
And I do think there's some room to have a look at that a bit more. But actually, I've subsequently discovered, and that's what I mean by that, don't twist it, like, it's done, who cares, move on. But actually, he's actually only been shuffled, and he used to be the head of risk at Auckland Council. This is pretty dire. And it's just he's left the mayor's office to go into the main blob. I do actually think there's some questions to be asked there, but that is always my point is this, is we should, I think the nature of the people politics attracts, it's very easy, and I've seen politicians bring themselves down because they can't help but twist the knife, that it is something we should be reflective on and self-aware.
I've watched this happen where a party decides that an MP doesn't fit anymore. And so they actually do the knifing. They go out and seed information with the media. They make sure that person that they don't want in that political party anymore cops an absolute flogging and negative stories that are coming from left and right and all over the place. And then they get approached by the chief whip, who then says, "Oh, really, this is untenable. You're really going to have to, hand in your resignation." And
It sounds very House of Cards, Cam.
it's totally House of Cards, and I've seen it happen so many times. And in fact, one person who had done several of those ended up having it done to him. And he said, "Oh, I heard the knock at the door on my apartment, and I knew what was next." And but that's what they do. A lot of the hatchet jobs are actually internal hatchet jobs. And how do I know that they're internal hatchet jobs? Because I've been asked to do some of the hatcheting.
Yeah, I think that's why one of the reasons I really love both the job and the organizations I'm involved with, that even when we're facing challenges, we tend to all get along.
Yeah.
And we're too small to have that sort of internal internal politics and the like. Something I'm very proud of is that, and with only a very limited number of exceptions, we've got quite a loyal alumni of people that have been through the Taxpayers Union. I see that with the growth of the Free Speech Union, and Jonathan's obviously moving on, but he's built that same sort of culture inside the FSU. I think that is one of the real advantages of going through that sort of think tank pressure group sort of network on the centre right, as opposed to straight into a sort of a young Nats, almost sycophantic type, yay blue, where you have to swallow those rats for the sake of party unity, and then you go into quite an unsupported environment in the beehive. And it's not a criticism of the institutions; it's the nature of the size of the beast, the nature of the beast. And we've both had staff from most of the political parties, and we've now had staff go into ACT, National, New Zealand First, and even Chris Hipkins' office.
Yep.
And I understand actually even Andrew Little has someone in his campaign who's one of our alumni. I think that's pretty cool.
You touch on a point there about the touch on polarization there, and this cult-like behavior of, yeah, I've got a blue t-shirt on, rah rah rah. And I see that so
Well, you've got a black one on.
Yep.
Giving it away.
Yeah. My girlfriend said the other day, "Oh, look, Ricky Gervais wears V-neck black t-shirts." I said, "Yeah, he's always been copying me." But I think Nicky Hager did me a favor in 2014 because he divorced me from party politics. He divorced me from being pathologically in support of one party or another. And then to add to that, when I had my stroke in 2018 and took a couple of years off, I took that time to spend a lot of time thinking and rejigging where I was coming from. If anyone who's been following me since 2005 when I started, I've changed a lot in that time, where I can sit here and
I
have...
think you have mellowed.
I'm not sure I mellowed. I got very angry during the COVID years because of the lockstep.
Too much.
Yeah, the lockstep of all of the political parties doing the same thing. And people were saying to me, "Oh, if only, Winston had chosen National instead of Jacinda." I said, "Sorry, you've got this wrong. Winston didn't choose Jacinda. He had no choice because Bill English took the cards off the table." And I know that's true because I know people on both sides of that table, right, that were there. And I know people who were in the room and begging Bill English to do the deal, right? And he wouldn't. He just wouldn't. He was scribbling on pieces of paper. He even said at one point when New Zealand first suggested some welfare reform, he said, I'd rather spit in my coffee and drink it than do that. That's what he said across the table.
I think is it. Yeah, look,
So,
yeah,
but the point I'm making is this,
right? In Joyce's book, but look, I don't know. Who knows?
But the point I'm making is this: it wouldn't have mattered if National was the government when COVID hit, because what people don't understand about politicians is they actually don't know usually the things that they're doing. They don't know because they rely on officials. So their same officials would have been there giving the same advice, and Bill English would have made the same decisions.
If we had been a step closer to Australia in terms of their decisions, I mean, Australia had an advantage that they could quarantine out in the middle of the desert.
They've also got
quarantined in the middle of our largest commercial city. Yeah, look, who knows? It's an academic argument to have.
But you mentioned also think tanks, and I think this is a good point that we can discuss now, is you've had criticism that you're an AstroTurf organization.
That, yeah, it's 200,000 subscribers. It's all on it. Yeah, that's all AstroTurf.
Yeah,
right.
So for those who don't know, an AstroTurf is fake grass, right? And so
fake grassroots.
Fake grassroots. And so and we see this all the time on the left, right? You've got Fact Aotearoa, which is one person, right? You've got the Disinformation Project, right, which was a couple of people.
Very well funded.
Funded couple of people. Same with Fact Aotearoa. It's the same with the Paul Thistles of this world. They like to say they're this organization, and it's right. His board is secret. It's him.
So
it's him.
It's so funny.
There's only one person in the whole thing, right? But they're given
a character. Does this guy actually exist?
Yeah, he does exist. Yeah,
okay.
He's hilarious. But the left wing has thousands. Antifa's another one, right? There's bugger all members of it. But you're accused of, and this is what I see in politics all the time. Very often what you're accused of, the person who's accusing you is doing exactly that. As a victim. Yeah, dirty politics, right?
Yeah.
Oh, the National Party's doing dirty politics. Well, it's every party. Yeah. Everybody is doing dirty politics. It's how politics is dirty. So you've been accused of being an AstroTurf organization. You're telling me 200,000 members.
It's just ridiculous. I mean, it's not even worth.
Well, you're in the pocket of big tobacco.
Yeah, we have the lowest industry in terms of, your sugar, your nicotine,
big frog,
booze. The lowest of any taxpayer group in the English speaking world, as far as I'm aware. I think it's at least 80% of our income last year. I think it's 86, is from small dollar online donations, averaging between $80 and $90, depending on the campaign. It is just in the last 12 months, it's about 15,000 individual donors. This is just the shoe just doesn't fit. I mean, it's so ridiculous. But I don't really. It doesn't really bother me because it's so like all the people we turned out to the 45 events we did on the Stock Three Waters Roadshow tour. Yeah, they're all paid actors. Come on, we're able. And look, I'll admit, when I started the organization and it was just me part time, I was a lawyer in the morning, I was a taxpayer advocate in the afternoon, and then it was me and a mate, and then it was me and a couple of mates. We had a pretty low subscriber base, and particularly that startup fund was, a dozen people giving, a decent amount of money to get us off the ground. But the shoe just doesn't fit now. It's just nuts.
Do you find it ironic that the people who are often accusing you of that are state funded?
Yeah, I mean, I've called that. Was that the lack of self-awareness is extraordinary. But look at it this way. So, what would the head of the Taxpayers Union? I'm pretty confident we've got. No. We'll put it this way. What would I prefer? Would I prefer one person giving the Taxpayers Union, let's say 100,000? Or would I prefer 1,000 people giving the Taxpayers Union $100? Now, the latter will mean it's cost me a lot more to service because it's a relationship with a lot more people, and I want to do thank you cards and things like that, and keep in touch and lots of touch points, etc., and report back to each one on what you enabled, etc. But would I prefer the one, or would I prefer the 1,000 people cheering the pony along, turning up to outside that LGNZ conference 2 weeks ago,
Turning up outside the National Party conference.
Yep. But obviously, and the fact that we can and do, I'm very proud of. And that is the definition of a grassroots movement. I mean, our role, one of the things I talk about the staff is we don't tend to use the word help. We're not a charity. We're a partnership with our supporters to achieve better policy. So, Mr. Donor, Cam, and I know that we talked about, before we came on air about you making a donation, and it can be we talked about the number 5, and it can be a $5 donation, a $5,000 donation, or a $5 million one.
But it's got to start with a 5.
You can choose the most appropriate. Use that line before. It is a partnership. I'm very lucky that we've built an institution with the values, and with the values, the vehicle, but not the resources. Mr. Donor, you have the values and the resources, but not the body or the institution in order to carry it out.
Yeah.
Yep. Let's work together.
Yeah.
And fundamentally, every one of our campaigns is funded that way. And I get,
You can be accused of being a grifter, and it's a grifting model, but
why? And of course,
you're actually still delivering something for what people are donating.
Well, I think bang for buck. I look at what we've achieved on rates capping. We haven't won the policy yet, and I'm really worried it's going to be a fudge. But we've certainly won the politics, and in only 5-6 weeks, Sam Warren, my local government campaigns manager, they've got the government talking our talking points. We had
all you need to do now is start doorstepping. Now that we know who all the candidates are, no doubt, I'm pretty sure you can get away. I'm pretty sure
that was a discussion on our team meeting this morning.
Pretty sure the next thing to do is we've got an
AI bot at the moment pulling together all the emails.
Get all the emails, contact them. Are you committed?
Have you? Hang on. You've been in on our call, have you?
No, Nikki told me.
I mean, it is a sad reality, actually, that it is, that we live in we pride ourselves in New Zealand as a corrupt-free society and things like that. But there has been, quite literally politically motivated hacks that have sort of been swept under the carpet. And we're quite naive on that sort of thing. My equivalents in Britain, for example, have the GCHQ, or the equivalent of the
GCSB.
Yeah, GCSB, work directly with them on their
hardening the IT system.
Yeah, I mean, their focus is around foreign actors interfering with politics, but it does really worry me.
Well, we've seen where that narrative has gone in the US now, and it's been revealed that the whole Russiagate accusations against Trump was totally false and completely manufactured by the Obama White House to help Hillary Clinton.
Well, they were not pushing for a direction; they were simply pushing for chaos. And it is something that, and not, I mean, I would say this, wouldn't I? But I do know that even the major political parties, at least when I last spoke to them about this matter about 18 months ago, had not had any assistance on that. And I think that is a real failing of.
And remember, we've got a history of political hacks, because I'm a victim of one. You're a victim of one. And the media were all in on it. Now, not one question was asked about.
No, but that's because we're on the centre right, Cam. And New Zealand is unusual, and I think it's one of the reasons why the Taxpayers Union is, for the size of New Zealand, the largest in the English-speaking world. On a per capita basis, the Taxpayers Union is the largest. Not absolute. The non-English-speaking world, the South Koreans have 3 taxpayer groups with more than 1 million members. And the Finns, for a country about the same size as New Zealand, have 250,000 paid members, but they do your taxes. It's slightly different. It's a little bit like the AA. Like they really are. They advocate, but it's much more of a sort of services type model. And they've been going 100 years, so it's slightly different. But I think what I think a big reason for that success and that size is when we ask our supporters, why do you like the Taxpayers Union, or why do you to opt in? And they say, often I feel like I get the real news from you, or I find out what's really going on in Wellington. I think we plug a gap for not having an equivalent of, a Telegraph, a Spectator, a Australian, a National Post, and use the Canadian example, or even a Spike. I mean, certainly our style is we want to be, for me, a good newsletter is something that that is something interesting, something funny, something that makes you want light your hair on fire, and something to do, a call to action.
Yeah. You mentioned earlier that you consider the Taxpayers Union to be kind of like a think tank.
Well, it is. We're a fourth generation think tank.
Yeah. So there's other think tanks in New Zealand. Obviously, there's the Fabian Society. We've got the Helen Clark Foundation.
Well, they're within, I think if you're embedded in the university and funded largely by taxpayers, I don't think that counts. But
which is where I'm heading with it.
Yeah.
Because then you've got the Maxim Institute, and you've got the guys in Wellington.
the initiative.
The Maxim Institute, the initiative, and yourselves. And
Well, the Integrity Institute too, I think they consider themselves.
well, that's right. But you've been attacked by the Integrity Institute. So let's talk about that for a little bit, because I'm not seeing a lot of integrity either from Bryce Edwards or from the funders, who incidentally are the same funders of Nikki Hager. If you look at their trust deed is a grab bag of left-wing grievances.
Well, it's pay for play.
Yeah.
It's quite literally like,
They're boasting about it. We've signed up Newsroom, and they're going to attack the people we want them to attack.
yeah, I mean, if I did that, I would be rightly slaughtered. They do it. I mean, it's there's been lots of commentary on it, and I thought that Richard Harmon's piece on it last week was
Is he still alive? I
Money.
didn't know that.
yeah.
What did he say?
Oh, just pointing it out that it is pay for play. I mean,
It's in their trust deed. They actually cite it.
I've always respected Bryce, but he had a really unfair swipe at my digital marketing company a few months ago that had a lot of stuff that was just demonstrably wrong. Just demonstrably wrong.
Hang on, he's got integrity.
And no checking. And even their little file on the Taxpayers Union that they have online, he's put together a whole list of everyone. It doxes staff, including admin staff. And when he had a piece in the media about, oh, well, that's good we're doxing their staff because we should know who has influence. Really? The admin staff? The office manager? And on other staff, it's just like, it has their background, says someone used to work at Parliament and things like that. It's just totally wrong. And that it's this strange... And I think they've cooked their own goose. I mean, it is so transparent that they are precise. I mean, they accuse us of basically being, pay for play. One of my core functions as the CEO of a think tank or a pressure group is to ensure the money follows the mission, and the mission doesn't follow the money. They would, and that's why they like to use the smear around, you stop Three Waters funded by tobacco. You're right. Whatever. And yet here is this trust deed that literally doesn't say that what you're going to focus your study on. It quite literally is what groups you're going to go on.
Who are we going to attack? We're going to attack Welfare Zealand,
Inclusions.
farmers, and they...
Well, no, not farmers. Federated farmers.
No, but
They do
they mention farmers in another part of the trust.
Okay, well, yeah, I mean,
Because I've gone through it.
a laundry list of
The laundry list of people that they think are enriching themselves. And it's
so it's this weird projection, but I think fundamentally, and again, it's coming back to reason why
they're saying that lobbying, if it's privately funded, is evil. That's what they're saying.
Well, they're privately funded.
No, no.
Because they're left-wing, that must therefore be virtuous. And this is what I come back to the point about reasonable minds can differ. They seem to have lacked that. They genuinely appear to believe, well, who knows if it's genuine, actually, because I think it's so unfair, some of their, and demonstrably wrong on some of their attacks, is that if you're on the conservative side of politics, you must be in it for the money, because how else can you be? Why else would you say that? Whereas if you're in it for the left side of politics, it's inherently good.
It's the whole idea of the left wing is progressive, meaning the right wing or the conservative side is regressive. That's what they're trying to say with language.
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to ask questions like, okay, so if the TU is the caricature for which you portray, and we actually just all about protecting power, what? So is the Taxpayers Union campaign against the power the big banks are influencing over the National Party against consumers right now with this outrage?
Yeah, and surely
ex post, or
surely the big banks are big, massive donors as well to the Taxpayers Union.
look, if the banks wish to join, because the banks, I know ANZ, I'm talking to you. Commonwealth Bank Australia, I'm talking to you. I know you guys fund the Australian Taxpayers Alliance, neither of which are a member of the Taxpayers Union. Just taxpayers.org.nz/join. No, I'll come.
Jordan on the graph. Jordan.
Well, I'm very lucky, and I set up the Taxpayers Union in my 20s. I was basically paid a peppercorn for the first 5 or 7 years. I now have a family and I have a mortgage to pay. We do have a staff with, I'm extremely lucky that I have turned something I really believe in into a career. And that is extremely, it's hard because it's bloody hard.
Yeah.
And the runway, there is never more than a few months' money in the bank. It terrifies my board and it terrifies me and it keeps me up. There's a lot of sleepless nights in this job, but I am extremely humbled and lucky, and the staff are always reminded of it, that, I get to complain about the government. Most people do it for free.
Yeah.
That is
All the state funded.
and so, but then I dream sometimes, if I won lotto, I just give the Taxpayers Union 5 or 10 million and the interest that would run on that. But actually, the moment that would happen, the TU wouldn't be what it is, because it is that hunger to be, the creativity in the campaigns, the punching above our weight.
People laugh.
Yep, the demonstration of value that you made this possible, bringing out people on the win and the loser and the losses on that journey. That is what makes, I think, the organisation allows it to punch above its weight. And I think that small dollar or that hunger, that sort of close to the line enables that. I think if you were funded by a big sugar daddy, or that you had funding elsewhere, that you would lose that. I think of the alternate, I'm not going to, actually there's not really a New Zealand one like that, but I think of like Menzies in Australia. So Menzies is the Australian federal government fund, like a Labor aligned think tank and a Liberal or centre right aligned think tank. And so they're fully taxpayer funded. You go in and they have huge staff, beautiful, everything's Rolls Royce, but they're so ineffective.
I've looked into the Integrity Institute and their Level the Playing Field campaign that they announced in conjunction with the Health Coalition Aotearoa and the Helen Clark Foundation. So I started looking into the Health Coalition Aotearoa, because that's pretty much, the website's hosted at the university. It's controlled by Boyd Swinburne. They've got lots of member organisations. So I compiled a list of them. There's about 56 member organisations. Almost all of them are either registered charities or government-funded organisations, lobby groups, for want of a better term. So they're a bunch of virtue-signalling lobbyists who are saying we're above board and we want to level the playing field because everybody else is not playing fair. And we want to be fair, but
These other groups have wrongthink.
Yeah, because they have wrong thinking. All these the worst people actually in lobbying are public health advocates who are paid for by the government to lobby against the government, which I think is absolutely ridiculous. But I compiled a list, 56 of them. I then compiled a list of all the email addresses that were on their websites and emailed them all a list of questions saying, well, you've talked about leveling the playing field and that you want to see, more transparency with funding and the like. Excuse me. I want to ask you these questions. Your funding information is not transparent. It's not even opaque. I'd like, in the interest of transparency and integrity, because you're working with the Integrity Union, to detail how you get your funding, how it's split up, et cetera, right? There's 56 I emailed them all. 32 of those 56 organizations who have a public email address, the email address bounced back.
They don't work.
They don't work. The emails don't work, right? 32 of the 56. Of the 56, I've had 2 replies. One from the Consumers Institute and another one that said, well, we're a charity and all the information is on the charity's website. I specifically said, I know you filed accounts on the charity's website. I've looked at them. Then it doesn't give you any opaqueness. Now, this is the same Charities Commission that says that Family First isn't a charity, but Greenpeace is. And they're saying it's because you're involved in political discussions. Every single one of these people in the Health Coalition Aotearoa are lobbying for policy changes, the politicians, etc., to do all that. They are engaging in the political process. And I have to call them to question. When you say leveling the playing field, hang on a second, you're a registered charity and yet you're engaging in the political process. Perhaps we should question whether you're a charity or not, or whether you're just a state or NGO funded lobbying organisation.
I get no sense that this government wants to. There's 2 sort of things around charities law. There is the extent to which the the don't have to pay any tax privilege extends to subsidiaries. This is the argument around Shot Over Jet in the case of Otahu, or Sanitarium in the case of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. That has been something where the TU has sort of has pontificated. The second one, though, which I don't sense, which I think is actually the bigger issue, but I get no sense this government wants to touch, is actually the question of what is charitable. Because there is as you rightly identify, it seems if you've got the word poverty in your name, you can be as political as you like.
Or a Maori name.
You're against poverty, you're inherently charity. But I mean, and this is what I think the fundamental misunderstanding, it's either genuine or it's deliberate because they're just political, is that actually the emotion that got me to give up my law career and do what I do, the emotion that goes through the bloodstream of the donors, both big and small, to the Taxpayers Union, is identical. We worry about the future of New Zealand and our kids staying here. I know, it's phrased different ways, but that emotion is the same, and actually both are okay. What annoys me is, frankly, the double standard, or those groups that, don't go out and get money from the public. One of the campaigns that the Taxpayers Union has managed to fundraise for the drafting of, and actually the draft is literally sitting on my desk to review, is we've got a bill that would mean that if you are a charity or non-profit and you're more than, I think it's 80% funded by government, so that, once you're only actually 20% of your income is coming from philanthropic or donations, that you should be covered by the Official Information Act.
Oh, I think it's a very good.
We have the transparency, because there is a huge, effectively an arm of state for which the normal ethical duties of public service, political neutrality, the code of conduct, and freedom of information, transparency does not apply. And I think that is something that from and it's huge money that goes into this. You only need to look at what's happened at what's the marae connected to Party Māori that
Oh, manually Umar. Yeah.
that. But there's other. I mean, I remember the very early days of the Taxpayers Union. In fact, it might have even been 6 months before the TU launched. There was the case of the National Trust for the Kahangarao schools putting wedding dresses on taxpayer-funded credit cards and things like that. It was absolutely outrageous. But because it wasn't an arm of the state, then when the minister asked questions, she was told to take a running jump. This is a private organisation. Piss off. Well, I'm sorry. This is taxpayer money.
Now, you touch on a point there where there's certain areas where we're almost not allowed to talk about things. If you mention anything about Manurewa Marae or Te Pāti Māori or this instance that you're almost shouted down. And
well, the media, that's the media. But
that's the media.
That's because we lack and I emphasize mainstream, and I know that your background with reality check and things like that, but I make a distinction. We have centre-right opinion. We don't have a mainstream centre-right news service. And that is unusual in the Commonwealth.
Oh, it's huge, which is going to bring me to the next one. I mean, you get some certain cut through in media. Sometimes they don't pick up a story or whatever. You've also brought out high profile and what the media would call controversial speakers on topics and things like that. Not necessarily the Taxpayers Union for FSU.
Yeah, the free.
But you have had some taxpayer union people who have come out and had very negative coverage about their views and things like that.
We've brought to the sort of big headlines. We had at our 10-year bash, we had Lord Daniel Hannan,
yes,
who was a Brexiteer. We didn't get bad media. It was just that. Oh, well, actually, no. Mihi Forbes did this weird conspiratorial thing about Atlas, and even though it wasn't even
where I was shedding,
no, but just bananas. But the other one, a better example of that is we brought out. It was pre-COVID. It must have been about 2019. The World Taxpayers event was in Sydney, and Grover Norquist, who is probably the most influential, maybe not in the Trump era, but certainly has been. It's certainly been described as the most influential GOP figure outside of Congress or outside of elected office. He founded, he was a speechwriter for Reagan and founded Americans for Tax Reform, and chairs the Wednesday, the muffin meeting or the Wednesday meeting, the infamous centre-right coalition meeting in downtown DC every Wednesday morning. And he is a big deal. He is who I remember it was one of the government officials wanted to chat to him, and actually remember going down to the American embassy, and because he knew that it was when we had that American ambassador who was a musician or always got out the guitar. We sat in this like bunker office and chat. It was weird. But as the American embassies always are. But we brought him down under, but he was, and we thought it would be bad, but it wouldn't. Was just amazed how bad it was. Is whenever we pitched him, it was the media could not get over and would only look at the fact that he had been a board member, or might have even been a board member still, of the National Rifle Association, of the NRA.
The most effective political lobbying organisation known to man.
Yeah, how many board members of the NRA do you think there were?
It's a not small number.
82.
Yeah.
So, and that was all they wanted to talk about, even though I don't think the Taxpayers Union has ever, I'd be surprised.
Well, it's not a taxpayer issue. It's not a taxpayer issue yet. If it's going to be a taxpayer issue.
Maybe actually there was a waste in relation to the register. But the point is,
The
it's not in
register
our
will-
wheelhouse. Yeah,
The register will become
it's
a topic for you to discuss in coming years.
we're pretty, and this is what the left try to claim as the secret agendas. The Taxpayers Union is pretty open about what it's trying to achieve. What we tell ministers is what we say in our media release.
See, what I really got you here for is how do I join the Atlas network? I've heard from the left wing that you're accused, Martin Bradbury accuses you of being a Zionist organization, along with the Free Speech Union. But there's this octopus organization that's sitting over New Zealand, controlling the Maxim Institute. And
Maximum members of Atlas.
yeah, they're not?
No, they're not.
Oh, they're
They're
separate members, aren't they?
They don't turn up to it. I've not seen them at anything.
Well, I want to open the Waiheke branch of the Atlas network. How do I get this amazing, funding that comes from the Atlas network?
Well,
Because you're donkey deep in it, aren't you?
I read online, and I think it might have even been on Martin Bradbury's blog, that the first rule of Atlas is not to talk about Atlas, which I found particularly funny because, it is something that I've always had in the back of my mind that, someone will turn this into a conspiracy.
They have.
Every time I used to go to an Atlas event, I would loudly tweet it. I literally, and the one of the staff a couple of years ago won the Dragon's Den or competition where you pitch a campaign for Asia Pacific up in, I think it was in Kuala Lumpur. And we literally got a big 3-meter long check as it was like 5, maybe 10 US prize or something for the campaign. And we literally tweeted it, wishing the staff congratulations and that sort of thing. And yet somehow there's this conspiracy that we're secretive about this. Let me just step back. So Atlas is a think tank based in the US, and their mission is to spread best practice and invest in think tank leaders that are pro-liberty, pro-freedom around the world.
So the opposite of the Fabian Society.
Yeah, I mean, they're actually not, see, the left try to create it as a caricature is related to GOP or Heritage or the conservative wing in the US, and it's not. It's classical liberal. It's more
Get the hell out of our way.
yeah, it's Cato, not Heritage.
Yeah.
If that, Cato,
yeah.
the libertarian think, but
Cato Institute rather than Heritage.
than Heritage Foundation. That's right. And the irony is that the time that story, and it was really led by Maharangi Forbes, who picked up a so-called investigative reporter who has so much credibility, he literally had created a fake Taxpayers Union website. This is the sort of, this is a high caliber of people, and an academic who they made relevant out of Australia, who was the one who actually, I think he came up with the first rule about Atlas, don't talk about Atlas, while he quote tweets all my historic tweets about how I've been very open about it. And what the funny thing was is that it's all about this international influence that is over New Zealand. And yet the two organisations that they point to is Atlas and World Taxpayers Associations. Well, I had recently been elected chairman of World Taxpayers, and the then chair of Atlas is Debbie Gibbs, Alan and Jenny's daughter, who was then a music producer in New York. And so Debbie and I always joke that it's so good they've fallen for it, because actually it's New Zealanders that are pulling the strings in.
Yeah, not Americans.
No. It's also, Atlas would be like 0.something% of our total funding. That year where we won that prize, it might be higher, but overall, it is absolutely. And to be frank, that's not the value of Atlas. The value of Atlas
networking.
Yeah, but it's sort of. Look, I was a young lawyer. I was 27 when I set this thing up. I didn't know what I was doing. They picked me up, introduced me to equivalents around the world. The first time I'd ever been to the US, they flew me to Fairfax, Virginia, where, it sounds terribly boring. I did a 3-week, called Think Tank MBA program. My roommate, Alex, I got there and asked what he did, and he said, I founded, I think it was the Oslo Freedom Forum or Freedom Foundation. Oh, what's that? Well, we take dissidents that have escaped places like North Korea and help them rebuild their lives. Okay. Yep. That's what do you do? I set up a taxpayer group in New Zealand, sort of thing. Most of the work. This is the irony, and it's why I often film in the award ceremonies and stuff, and they recognise the Atlas partners. That the vast majority of the work, it would be almost impossible for those on the left to disagree that it is virtuous. The fighting for women's rights in India against sex-based occupational licensing, fighting for or helping people that have escaped Iran because of political dissidents, allowing stable property rights so Indigenous people in South America are able to own their own land, sort of thing. This is stuff that the idea that they're anti-Indigenous too is just absolute nonsense on stilts. And of course, that was borne out by an accusation that Atlas was somehow behind the Voice referendum, which the only connection, and look, I know it's defamatory because it is true. It is the dishonesty from Mihirangi Forbes on that piece that was funded by New Zealand taxpayers that came out about 18 months ago, suggesting that Atlas was behind that or somehow involved in that referendum campaign. And their only connection was one of the spokespeople for Advance Australia, which led the no vote for the Voice. One of the spokespeople was on the board of an economic think tank, I think with the Centre for Independent Studies in Sydney, which is sort of the equivalent of the old New Zealand Business Roundtable or the Initiative, very wonky, boring economic think tank. So he was on that board, and that even though I've never seen them at an Atlas event, that think tank is an Atlas Network member. Well, what she failed to mention was that another board member on the same board was actually on the management committee or on the board of the Yes vote. So the identical connection, you could make that argument, but that then turned into Atlas equals anti-Indigenous equals anti to treaty, and really is a hit job on David Seymour, who we all know is a think tanker, and this might come as news, but is on the centre right, and worked for a Canadian think tank. Ooh, that was a member of Atlas. And I think I'm trying to think of the I think it was at Frontier, one of the big Canadian ones. That Fraser actually, that this is somehow a huge conspiracy. I can tell you, with the exception of pro-Indigenous rights, and that was the other thing. The only Maori reference I've ever heard at Atlas was Debbie Gibbs in front of an audience of 1,500 people in Manhattan, doing a greeting in Maori. That's the extent of it.
Well, I'm just disappointed that there isn't a vast swathe of cash that can come.
If only there was.
Yeah.
I mean, David Seymour accused, said it's like Pizzagate. It actually is. It is just nuts, and it speaks volumes of the caliber and lack of. And maybe it's because it is Mihi and because it's Maori programming. There's just zero.
But it's not just Mihi.
With common sense that goes over
all the people that were
editorial standards.
Yeah, all the people who criticize the Taxpayers Union or come up with these mad conspiracies and all the, I kind of liken them to EV drivers, right?
I'm an EV driver.
Well, maybe this will apply to you, but maybe you have the windows down. But most of them,
it's powered by Huntley.
Powered by coal. Most of the people who are criticizing you are so righteous and so enamored with their own argument. It's like they've been huffing the cloud of smog that comes out of their EV, and it's been piped straight into the air conditioning of their EV, that they've got too much smog in their system that they think they're right.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, it depends on, and that's why. Because that's what I haven't been able to figure out about Bryce and the whole integrity thing, because
there's no
I've actually, Bryce, all my dealings with him has actually been quite a good guy.
I always
Which
thought
is why this is so unusual.
I always thought Bryce was a reasonable lefty.
Yeah,
right.
that's right.
You could have a discussion with him. He's become decidedly unreasonable.
And that's why he strongly rejected it. But I recently suggested that I can't help if some of it's been ghostwritten by someone else.
Does the name start with him?
It is. I just can't explain it. Because there's a real. I mean, I think he's doing. He's always had a good reputation. And the left, I think he's been harshly treated because he didn't swallow a lot of the woke stuff. And I think he's pretty pro free speech, and I want to like him. But the behaviour in the last 6 months and the, of course, it's lack of integrity, but the lack of even sort of fact checking stuff. And then you look at that trustee, that the very thing that that he's accusing everyone of, basically pay for play. There's no integrity, there's no real values there, it's all just following the money, is just proven so hollow when you've accepted money from your sugar daddy broke up with Victoria University.
Because they wouldn't be what they were told.
Yep.
Yeah.
And a trustee that we would, I think about this.
If I had a trustee like that, I created an institute, the Whale Oil Institute, and I had a trustee that is going to go after you.
We'd have to call it Save the Whale.
Save the Show. Whale Integrity Institute. But it would be an outrage. I mean, Nicky Hager wrote a book. A lot of it wasn't true in there. That it, and I know it wasn't true. He wrote a book saying that I was doing pay for play. Now, I've never been paid by anybody. Right? I do most of the things that I've done for shits and giggles. Right? I was having fun. I did things because I could. Is it my fault that John Key manipulated some information from the SIS in an OA? That's not my fault. I was given stuff but that's the thing. Nicky Hager wrote this big conspiracy that the centre-right used me to create chaos in order to silence people, which is exactly what he was doing. And now we've got Bryce Edwards saying, we're called the Integrity Institute, and we're going to go after those organisations that don't have any integrity. You
keep saying integrity, and I think I've shown you that there's a South Park sketch that I can't remember this. I'm not. David's into South Park. I'm not so much, but it's this integrity weed.
Yeah.
And it's like, don't just buy weed off some big corporate. Buy it from integrity weed. And 100% of our profits, goes to fighting the war on drugs. I'm sorry, goes to fighting those who want to prohibit drugs. I.e., we want drugs legalized so we can sell it. It's about integrity. Every time I hear the Integrity Institute, I just hear the integrity. Yeah, it is a fair question. It's a little bit like it's a little bit like asking, who's really, or what's my, it's right to ask decision makers and those in power and politicians, who's calling the shots. And I think that there is a little bit like our campaign, why on earth are the Nats bailing out the banks?
Oh, that's ridiculous.
And there's legitimate questions. I think, and look, I have to be, it's no secret. I have 1,000 campaigns I'd like to do. And I'm only able to do the dozen or so that I can figure out how to fund them. If the government came along and wanted to do a sugar, I don't know, there's a can of Coke over there, a sugar tax. Now, am I going to go to Coca-Cola or Chelsea or Pepsi or Frucor and say, hey, come on, guys, that...
probably not, because you're just opposed to a new tax.
Yeah, exactly. Of course I'm going to ask for them to financially support it. Am I going to turn the Taxpayers Union into a full-time anti-sugar tax? No way. And that's sort of, you judge it on the work.
Judge it on the integrity.
On the tobacco stuff. I'm very confident that on nicotine, we've been intellectually honest. That our positions initially really matched Treasury saying tax is working less and less, you're driving an illicit market, and you're hurting disproportionately those that can least afford it because it is a lower class vice. Yes, well, proven right on that very clearly. And then now it is identical to not the fringe smoking groups, but Ash, which is the main one, and credit where credit's due, it's the one Helen Clark's
They're
involved.
actually honest.
They are, it is, our policy positions are absolutely identical, which is that if you tax vaping or the sort of less harmful products, you will drive people back to the durries. And we have a really good, in digital marketing, talk about an A/B test where you send two identical emails with a different subject line, and you A/B, which one does better. We've got a great public policy A/B test because New Zealand and Australia have taken almost the opposite approaches in terms of vaping. They have, we had quite an unregulated market, and we actually argued that there should be some, a lot more safety regulation because we were getting people mixing it in buckets and garages, and there was only a matter of time before something went wrong. But that in Australia, you need a prescription. It's really
It's ridiculous because
really hard. And as a result,
it makes nicotine down bad.
we have almost, we're going to achieve the smoke-free goal, whereas Australia, that has, they're second highest in the world excise, they're the highest, have an enormous illicit market, and they're driving people back to the durries.
There is a place for lobbying, and I don't care which side it's on.
But that would be about 1% of our commentary.
But I'm looking at a recent lobbying case. The government announced they were going to look at products coming into New Zealand for building, right? Because I think it's 38%. Building a house here costs 38% more than building a house in Australia. In Australia, they don't have monopolies in particular products. In New Zealand, fiberboard or gypboard is the brand name. 95% of the market controlled by one company. If you look at cement, one company. And so what the government is saying, well, we're just going to free that up. Now, that's come about because of lobbying. Sure, it's by lobbying for people who are trying to bring products in and free up the market. But there's a very definite public good for consumers in having more products available in the market and not relying on one massive monopolistic company that's margining every product from the quarry to building the house.
Yeah.
And Bryce Edwards would say, well, that's wrong because those companies are private companies and they're going to have a private profit that's going to come from that, ignoring the public good.
Do you think that it's come about too, and it's something I notice with my young staffers, and actually of my generation too, of a lack of a appreciation of the difference between an interest and a conflict of interest.
I don't think people understand conflict of interest at all. You hear cries of conflict of interest for that.
When you look at it, sometimes it's, hang on, the interests are aligned here.
Well, that's the funny thing about the Integrity Institute. They say they want to look at the qualifications of ministers to see if they're qualified to sit in the portfolio. And yet, Bryce Edwards was complaining that Nicole McKee was part of the gun lobby and now she was helping write gun laws. It was insane.
Well, we must exclude the unionists from industrial law in the Labour Party.
Exactly. And that's a pretty good point which we can wind this up, Jordan, because we could talk for hours and hours on this, which means I have to get you on again.
Thank you, Ken. I've enjoyed this.
Yeah.
And good on you. You look at the way that where the media is going, it is a lot less around the sort of stables and more around the podcasting and personality.
It needs to be more discussion like this. We don't agree on everything 100%. We never are. It's like Chris Trotter and I sitting down. There's probably 80% we agree on. 10% maybe one way or the other we can be convinced, and then there's 10% that we're never going to.
I said to Don Brash in the weekend, because I said about the China thing and I disagree with him. I said, it's so good to know that someone so smart can be so wrong on something.
And that's a perfect point. So thank you so much, Jordan, for coming on the Good Oil podcast.
Hey, now welcome to the show, where the wind's blowing strong and the truth can flow. This is the Good Oil. Catch a vibe today with Cam Slater leading us all the way.